Today is really Public Education Day. I started the morning at 7 a.m. And was driven to the Alexandria Community School. The minister was there, Murat was there, we all made speeches. And as soon as that finished, I went to my old school at Fort Street, the high school founded in 1849 and one of the most wonderful schools in our whole country. It's the oldest continuously operating high school, and it has produced many people, including me. But I didn't have somebody there from the Summerhill OC class, which I went to from North Strathfield Public School. I started at North Strathfield Public School, and earlier this year I went there and I had a group photograph with all the students of my old class in my old classroom, and it is in pride of place in my office in Sydney to remind me where I came from and where I am and my great debt to public education. I was very moved today at Fort Street because the principal had arranged for the students there to sing the old school song. And, you know, people of my age get very sentimental about such things. Present with me today, or rather I was present with them, were Their Excellencies, the Governor-General of Australia, Samantha Mostyn, and His Excellency, Mr. Studdard, who is her partner. And he was a Fortian, is a Fortian, and he and I listened to the old school song, and tears ran down our cheeks as we remembered times past and our great debt to the school. I have to tell you that during the time I served on the High Court of Australia, the highest court in our country, during most of that time, I was the only product of public education on the court. Now that's a worry. The reason for it is that in the past, the coalition parties, when they were in office, tended to appoint people from very posh private schools. The Labor Party tended to appoint people from Catholic schools. And I somehow snuck in, and I got in there to represent the values of public schools. And if it is true that I was the great dissenter, I think it might have had something to do with the different values, the special values of justice and equality that I received in my schools. I can remember every one of my teachers. Miss Pontifex was the teacher at North Strathfield Public School. She was my teacher in first class. On the wall was a map of the old British Empire. I'm talking about 1944. We were still at war. The country had been really tested in the war, and this was a very dangerous time. My teacher in second class was Mrs. C. I'm telling you this because we've got to acknowledge and remember our teachers. Mrs. C. She was a wonderful teacher who took me through reading, composition, and singing. And I'm still a pretty good singer. And then I went to third class where my teacher was Mrs. Godwin. She was also the school librarian. She introduced me to libraries and to the precious body of knowledge there. And then I went to fourth class where my teacher was Mr. Casmer. Mr. Casmer was very much against smoking, which was very common with parents at that time. And he inculcated in students to be very careful of smoking. It wasn't a big problem with me because my parents didn't smoke, but it was a big problem with a lot of people in the school at that time. And at the Summerhill OC class, Mr. Redmond, Mr. Gorringe, and Mr. Tennant. At one stage, Mr. Tennant had a car accident, and the principal, rather reluctantly, I think, Murat, had to take over the teaching of the OC class. And he came into these stroppy little kids, and he would take no nonsense. And because he was a principal in those days, he had the cane up his sleeve. And I was very proud of the fact that I'd never got the cane, but Mr. Gibbons looked at my textbook and my departmental exercise book with a green cover, and he lifted it up and said, "This book is light. You have been tearing out pages from the King's property, and you are now going to get two of the best." And I said, but the inkwell spilt and I was trying to clean up the mess in the book. No buts, no ifs, put out your hand. And so my glorious career as a non-offender came to a shatter. In the Court of Criminal Appeal, I was always the most sympathetic and understanding to people who had committed little infractions. But the greatest gift I got from a teacher at that school was from Mr. Tennant, who had received from Dr. Evatt, the Australian Minister at the United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This was the Universal Declaration which was adopted on the 10th of December in 1948. Dr. Evatt was a member of the committees and was the president of the General Assembly, the only Australian who has been the president of the General Assembly, Dr. H.V. Evatt, who is a product of the New South Wales Department of Education, a brilliant man. And he took part in the adoption and declared this adopted as the Magna Carta for the world. And the first article in the Universal Declaration says, in these famous words, "All persons are born free and equal in dignity and rights." All persons are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Here is the Universal Declaration. It would be a good thing if children in our schools, in default of a National Bill of Rights, were taught the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's a very important message. And it's a message that I carried with me. And it was a message that was personal. And it came to a fruit today when I went to my old school, because the message of equality and dignity was important to me in a matter that in those bad old days I had to keep secret, about my sexuality, about being gay. But I always knew all persons are born free and equal in dignity and rights. So at Fort Street High School this morning, I took along my partner, Johan, who's been with me for 55 years. I wouldn't have done that a few years back, but I talked so much about my school. He talked about his schools in the Netherlands under German occupation and after, but I'd never taken him to my school. So I took him to my school, and he was given a great welcome by the Governor-General, by her partner, by the principal, by the students, and it was a really big non-issue, as it should be, in schools, free and secular and compulsory, the great trio of our principles. And so when I was asked to become a patron of the alumni of public education, I said, I'm afraid, and I say this to the minister, I would have to become an agitator for greater equality and freedom and fairness in the funding of public education and in the funding of teachers. Now, I think that the federal government under Mr. Albanese has been pretty good, because he has had the chance to appoint 3 justices to the High Court of Australia, and they have all been products of public education. Chief Justice Gageler went to Muswellbrook Public School and Muswellbrook High School. Is there anyone here tonight from Muswellbrook High School? Because that's a wonderful thing, that the Chief Justice of our country was educated in the Muswellbrook High School. The Albanese government has also appointed Justice Jago, who went to Normanhurst Girls High School in Sydney, a public school. And it also appointed Justice Beech-Jones, who, like Queen Mary of Denmark, went to public schools in Tasmania. He's the first Justice of the High Court ever to be a product of Tasmania. And he has become a Justice of the High Court of Australia, educated in the public schools of Tasmania. So that's 3, and that's a good corrective to the past, when there were, in my early days on the court, no other justice came from public education. We've got to keep our eyes on this, because values in, values out. And that's what we have to do as supporters and recipients and beneficiaries of public education. So, if I want to talk about a teacher, a special teacher, I would have to talk about all of them. But I would mention Mr. Gorringe, who gave me this little book that told me I was free, equal, and I had dignity and rights, and that is something no one could take away from me. And that is a message you're more likely to get in public education, free, secular, and compulsory, than you're likely to get elsewhere, with all respect to other schools. And so, thank you for having me here tonight. I'm always proud to speak up for public education. This has been a day full of public education, and I'll keep speaking about public education, the dignity of public schools, and funding, because that is what, as citizens, we must do to sustain this great national experiment. And I congratulate all the teachers who are here, all the recipients of awards, those who might have missed out on awards. Their time will come. I congratulate the parents and the students, and I'm proud to be with you as a beneficiary of the great system of Australian public education. Thank you for having me.